From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
President Trump moves to exempt automakers from newly imposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico for 1 month, but says reciprocal tariffs will still go into effect on April 2nd. We'll explore the impact on financial markets with Victoria Fernandez at Crossmark Global Investments.
And on this day after President Trump's address to Congress, we'll talk with Republican Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee about tariffs, taxes, and avoiding a government shutdown.
And the U.S. cuts off Ukraine from intelligence that Kyiv has used to target Russian forces, even as the White House shows optimism over a minerals deal. We'll be joined by Alexandra de Hoop Scheffer from the German Marshall Fund.
Thanks for joining us. On this day after the big speech, the late edition of Balance of Power on this Wednesday after reaffirming his new tariffs against Canada and Mexico, President Trump has suddenly granted temporary exemption status to the major U.S. automakers. Here's White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt a short time ago.
We spoke with the big three auto dealers. We are going to give a 1-month exemption on any autos coming through USMCA. Reciprocal tariffs will still go into effect on April 2nd, but at the request of the companies associated with USMCA, the president is giving them an exemption for 1 month so they are not at an economic disadvantage.
Joining us now with the latest on these tariffs is Jennifer Welch of Bloomberg Economics. So, Jenny, we heard, or Canadian officials at least told Bloomberg today that unless all tariffs are removed, they are leaving in place their retaliatory measures against the U.S. So if those are still intact and reciprocal tariffs are coming in April, these automakers are still going to be contending with tariffs at some point anyway, once the 1 month delay is over, certainly.
Oh, absolutely. Plus, we have steel and aluminum tariffs coming next week. We have the big China trade review due in April as well. Potentially additional tariffs on cars, chips, and pharmaceuticals, and maybe additional tariffs on copper and lumber. So a lot of additional tariff waves to come.
I guess the question at this point for a lot of people watching this is, what is Donald Trump's obsession with Canada? Because it does not appear to be in the same league as Mexico, not even close, when it comes to fentanyl crossing the border. There's been a lot of outreach, Canada trying to stay friends, but it looks like this is going to stick.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Secretary Lutnick in his interview with Bloomberg Surveillance this morning said this is all about fentanyl, but there's not much fentanyl coming through the Canadian border. He also said Canada and Mexico are working hard to address the issue, and yet these tariffs are sticking. Now, Prime Minister Trudeau says that Donald Trump has a different initiative in mind, which is to undermine Canada's economy as part of his very serious effort to make Canada the 51st state.
Great to have you with us, Jenny Welch, Bloomberg Economics, on our top story on Balance of Power this morning. As Jenny mentioned, on Bloomberg Surveillance, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said the U.S. tariff negotiations with Canada, Mexico, and the EU will continue even after they've taken effect. Here's how he put it.
Some tariffs will come on right away, and then some tariffs will be registered, and they will take 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and they will come on in due course. So there's a process for tariffs in America, but we will announce them, and we will be negotiating with all these countries thereafter, and then they go into effect over a period of months. Once it's in, they will stick.
We're joined now by Victoria Fernandez, Chief Market Strategist, Crossman Global Investments, to talk about how the news is whipsawing Wall Street. It's been a couple days on the markets, Victoria. Thank you for spending some time with us here. I guess we're getting a sense of the impact that confusion, that uncertainty can have, just as corrosive as the tariffs themselves.
Absolutely. It's just the idea that companies don't know what's coming and they don't know what's going to be in place that's driving, I think, so much of the volatility in this market. You may not like some news that's given to you, but if you know what it is, you can plan accordingly. You can go ahead and put your 2, 3, 5-year plans in place, and your CapEx intentions can go into place. But if you don't know and you're just sitting back waiting to get some confirmation, that's where the volatility is, and that's what's been driving this market. And so any headline that comes out, a 1-month reprieve for the auto dealers, automatically you see the market react to that, thinking that there's more good news coming or latching on to anything that they can. It sounds like there's going to be more of that ahead of us.
Well, so if there is more uncertainty ahead, and to your point about how this actually could impact behavior, not just on the part of market participants, but say consumers who are wondering what kind of price tags they're going to be looking at in the not so distant future, Victoria, are you subscribing to the notion that we could be heading into a stagflationary environment? And if so, how would you position for that?
Yeah, stagflationary is an interesting term for where we are. Typically, when we talk about being in stagflation, the inflation component is actually much higher than where we are now. Obviously, we're not at 2% target. We had super core PCE at 3.1, and our other inflation measures closer to that 3% level. But we're not at extremely high inflation. Now, that could change. We did see in some of the ISM components that prices paid is moving higher, so that could be a concern coming. And for us, then, when we're talking to our clients, it's what we've been talking about all year. There's going to be some volatility and some uncertainty. So we want to be in those names that are still in uptrends, but have pulled back over time. Financials are in that situation. They're the leaders really right now of the sectors in the market. You've seen healthcare start to do a little bit better. And so there's some areas within the market you can maybe start dipping your toe in the water as you see some pullbacks, but you want to make sure you're keeping in sectors that are in uptrends.
Just to add on to what Kaylee's talking about here, stagflation, you added hesitancy to hire. The headline in today's ADP report showing a significant slowdown in hiring here in the United States. What's this going to look like a couple months from now when you start adding federal workers who are being laid off by the thousand?
Yeah, you're right. That hasn't even come into the numbers yet. And actually, if you look over the last 2 years, 2023 and 2024, 95% of the jobs that were added were actually that non-cyclical component of the market. It's federal workers, it's healthcare, it's education. So we really have been lagging already in the cyclical component of labor. And I think we might see that more. It puts the Fed in a position where they really can take some time and wait and see how some of this works out before they start lowering rates to make sure they don't get caught.
Well, Victoria, as you mentioned earlier, kind of being in areas of the market in which you're seeing an uptrend, financials in particular is one thing you mentioned. And I would point out as well, we heard from the president last night about how he's pushing for deregulation, something that obviously could potentially benefit banks, for example, but you could loop energy companies in, businesses really across the board. To what extent is a deregulatory effort and a tax cut effort as well an offset for some of these other disturbing factors industry has to contend with?
Yeah, Kaylee, I think deregulation was really the push for the animal spirits that we saw following the election. So many companies came out and were talking about their excitement around the potential deregulation. In the first Trump administration, those were the things that started to come out first, right? The tax cuts, the deregulation, all those positive components. This time around, the script has been flipped, and we're starting with some of the things that could cause us a little bit of pain, and some of the positive elements will be coming later. I'm hoping deregulation, a bill that comes through with some tax cuts. I hope that will happen later this year and will be an offset to some of the growth concerns that we're seeing here in the first half of the year.
All right, Victoria Fernandez, great to have you on the program. Chief Market Strategist at Crossmark Global Investments. Thank you. And coming up, our political panel will weigh in on the twists and turns in tariff policy. They'll join us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I think where he still leaves himself wiggle room, and I think it's smart, we know he's a negotiator, is to use these tariffs as leverage points to either get more folks on the border, more law enforcement to prevent fentanyl, more fair reciprocal trade going across the border. And that's why I think you see the fluidity that you see over the last several days as to where everything's going to land.
Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia on the early edition of Balance of Power today, talking about President Trump's tariff strategy. And joining us now for more is this evening's political panel. Roger Fisk is with us, senior advisor at Burway and former senior advisor to President Obama, Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Rob Waters, managing partner at the Madison Group. Welcome to you both. As we spoke with the senator today, she did suggest, yes, that there's some fluidity here, but we also asked her about the disturbance that President Trump alluded to in his speech last night, that there could be some disturbance because of tariffs, but to what extent is that okay? And she said, and this is a quote, "You're going to hear a pretty loud outcry if we see dramatic rises in energy prices or whatever other costs people will see." Is that why we're seeing moves, Rob, like we saw today, pulling back at least in one sector, autos, where people may have been feeling that?
So candidly, I was at the White House at 9 o'clock this morning speaking with senior advisors, and I just have to say, as I alluded on the show a few weeks ago, these are all negotiating tactics. Everything is fluid. We have $2.8 trillion worth of drugs coming across the Mexican border. We have tariffs that are unfair in Canada. This is just a negotiating tactic. That's all it is.
Does that mean tariffs are never really implemented for the long term? Because Wall Street, depending on the day, is pricing it in like this is for real.
I mean, you have two Wall Street titans in the cabinet who are preaching calm and are saying it is a negotiating tactic. I would do a wait and see. Let's talk on Monday, not today.
Well, one of those titans I think you're referring to, the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, seems to have been out front of the president on this in some ways. He was the one to first suggest in an interview yesterday that there could be some pullback, at least in some areas, of the Canada and Mexico tariffs that had just been implemented. And we heard much firmer language from President Trump. Yes, we got this with autos, but do you think everyone's actually aligned here, Roger?
First off, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be here with Rob. I don't think that there's alignment, which doesn't necessarily surprise me. The president has never been necessarily a fixed philosophical or policy kind of person. It's very circumstantial. It's very personality driven. So if he has a good phone call with Prime Minister Trudeau, things start to go in one particular direction in terms of his language. If he has a bad call with President Sheinbaum, it goes in another direction, et cetera. So it's not as if he comes into these things from a fixed philosophical viewpoint, but it's more just, somewhat to Rob's point, playing off the circumstances as they unfold and dealing with kind of like how the personality elements of it come together. And that's why I think, also to agree with Rob, that the next week or two is really going to be fluctuating day to day. And to your specific question, that's why I think you see a Stephen Miller or a Secretary Lutnick talking in very different directions because there isn't that philosophical core in this administration.
Take us to school, Rob Waters, on Canada. We were just talking to Jenny Welch about this. We know how many thousands of pounds of fentanyl are crossing the Mexican border. It's something like 43 it was last year. When it comes to Canada, there's been outreach from Justin Trudeau. We just want to be your friends to the north. Why are they being lumped in the same pile as Mexico?
I think it's a review of NAFTA and fairness. I think, you know, when you look at dairy prices going that way at a 242%, when you look at our meat prices being taxed in the way it's going, it is just a comedy factual. I think Trudeau's call today, I think understanding the importance of trade partnership might actually come in a more flowing play. To Roger's excellent point, yes, it is transactional. This is a more business-oriented administration, and I think by next week it might, I don't know, shift a little.
Well, the president certainly suggested that tariffs are one way to get the country to a better place in his address to a joint session of Congress last night. And we just got some numbers in from Nielsen, Roger, that a lot of people were actually watching, drew an audience of 36.6 million viewers, according to their data. That is actually higher than the 32 million that tuned in for Biden's State of the Union.
I'm sure that'll be on Truth Social
last year. Yeah. But it becomes a question of, did they hear what they wanted to from a president who says he was elected with an overwhelming mandate when it comes to the economy, whether it was on tariffs or taxes or his other messaging?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things in there was how little real estate out of the entire speech was spent on things like inflation, which to me felt like it was something that he wanted to kind of approach as like a drive-by, which was to talk about it pretty quickly and then move on. For example, if you look at just the full breakdown of the speech, some of the cultural issues got a lot more play or coverage from his remarks than some of the economic ones. I think that they have to be hearing from some focus groups and things like that, both that they're coordinating and that some of their allies are coordinating, that, you know, he said we're going to fix grocery prices on day one. And which is not to say that the president can do that on day one, but it definitely seems to have slipped in terms of like his rhetorical priorities.
Well, there were a lot of different audiences, I think we can argue, for the speech last night, right? The world leaders were watching. Democrats were certainly listening and protesting at some point. Maybe the most under pressure member of the audience was the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Maybe Senate Majority Leader John Thune in that same group as Donald Trump talked about plans to push his legislative agenda through Congress. Listen.
Americans expect Congress to send me this funding without delay so I can sign it into law. So, Mr. Speaker, John Thune, both of you, I hope you're going to be able to do that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Leader, thank you. Thank you very much. And let's get it to me. I'll sign it so fast, you won't even believe it.
A salute, a tip of the hat, maybe some nervous smiling. Rob Waters, a couple things need to get done here. First and foremost is avoiding a government shutdown in 9 days. A lot of Republicans have an allergy to a CR for the rest of this fiscal year. It means you're going to need Democrats. And they didn't look like they wanted to play along with a lot last night. How's this going to work?
Well, first, I just want to offer my condolences to Congressman Turner's family. He was a law professor of one of my partners, and what a beautiful man, and I'm so sorry for his passing.
Lost him last night.
That said, the numbers have gotten a little larger. I think a CR is going to happen. I don't think it's going to be a full year. I don't think you can with NDAA the way it is. I think we might see a 2 to 3 month, I think, Roger, you might agree with this, a stopgap funding, and more negotiations might happen. That's what I'm hearing, at least from my friends.
To the point that Joe was alluding to on the Democratic behavior last night, we, going into the speech, were looking at reporting that suggested leadership was telling members that they needed to essentially play it cool, maintain decorum. We were 3 minutes into the speech when Al Green stood up, waving his cane and shouting at the president that he didn't have a mandate to cut Medicaid, was actually escorted out of the chamber. Was that problematic for Democrats, what we saw last night?
I can understand the frustration, but in a political context, it's not helpful. And in a way, you saw the Democrats' dilemma kind of play out in all the different reactions. What I think you also saw was somewhat of a solution peeking around the drapes from Senator Slotkin's response at the end of it, which I think was very measured, which I think had very strong tent poles in both her national security credentials and just kind of basic kitchen table common sense. And what she was playing off, in my analysis, was a growing concern around unelected bureaucrats, as the phrase from last night was, having free rein into personal data, having free rein into a lot of consequence-free government decisions, and that there's just a general sense of drift in terms of the focus of this administration, which I think is fair. But I don't think that having the paddles and the outbursts and things like that, let Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, that's their thing. Let them do that. And I think Democrats, although we often pay the price for taking the high road, are better served honoring the institution and trying to at least respect the decorum of those events. But that said, if you're Congressman Green and you have a district that is heavily dependent on Medicaid and you think it's potentially on the axe, well, you know, it never hurts to go to the mat for your people in this business.
Must feel like a trailblazer right now. You remember you lied? He was urged to resign. There was talk of him being censured. He was reprimanded formally by the House. What should happen to Al Green? We only have about 30 seconds, Rob.
Listen, I'm all for decorum, and I think the office should reflect it. What he did last night in a threatening gesture with his cane was beyond all, and I'm sure it will be looked at, and that would be my final comment.
Well, I'm glad you could both join us this day after. Roger Fisk, Rob Waters, our panel this evening on Balance of Power. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Thanks for coming along. This day after President Trump addressed Congress, we spent some time earlier on the early edition of Balance of Power with Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary, Bloomberg contributor, has some real concerns about the impact of tariffs.
These tariffs are a self-inflicted supply shock wound. Higher prices, less competitiveness because businesses are having to pay more for all their inputs, and because they have to pay higher prices, less purchasing power for consumers, which means fewer jobs down the road. So these are like an oil price shock. They're just all bad for the economy. And they're probably they probably were like an oil price shock of $40 a barrel in terms of what was being done to Mexico and Canada. And now with these changes, maybe it's only $25 or $30 a barrel. But it's still clear, big, and bad. That's why before they started saying they were going to take the tariffs off, almost $2 trillion of stock market wealth had been destroyed in a matter of 2 days. Now nobody knows quite what's going to happen, but why would you make an important investment decision amidst all of this uncertainty? If you were thinking about buying a new car or buying a new house, wouldn't you wait? And when everybody waits, the economy slows down, and that's why the risk of recession, which everybody thought was extremely unlikely on January 20th, is now seen by many, many people as a real and serious risk for some time this year. So I think we're doing real damage to the economy. It's not just a short-run thing. Inflation expectations for the long term, for 5 or 10 years, are higher than they've been in a very long time, according to the Michigan survey. You know, I heard the president talk about a little disturbance, and I heard the senator talk about that. A little disturbance that we'll work through, and then it will be good. You know what that sounds like? It sounds like transitory inflation. Transitory inflation didn't work out very well for the people who used that term in 2021 and 2022. It didn't work out very well for the Biden administration. It didn't work out very well for the Fed. And I don't think talking about how inflation is transitory is going to work out very well for the Trump administration either.
You can find our full conversation with Larry Summers, former U.S. Treasury Secretary and Bloomberg contributor, online or on the terminal. Clearly, he had some strong feelings about the drama surrounding the tariffs. It looks like we're getting some more from the Canadian foreign minister, who says that Canada won't go through psychodrama every 30 days, as we saw. One 30-day delay, now another 1 month delay for autos in particular. Does seem like we're getting cyclical here.
Well, except maybe we will go through that every 30 days. We'll have to find out. Transitory, huh?
Yeah.
Keep that handy for the future.
We'll have more still ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I'm asking Congress to fund a state-of-the-art Golden Dome missile defense shield to protect our homeland, all made in the USA. This is a very dangerous world. We should have it. We want to be protected, and we're going to protect our citizens like never before.
President Trump last night floating the idea once again of developing a domestic missile defense system. He calls it a Golden Dome. With us now, Bloomberg's national security reporter, Dan Flatley. It's great to have you back, Dan. I'm not sure I know the difference between a Golden Dome and an Iron Dome, but this apparently is for real. How would it be possible this wouldn't work the same way, for instance, as what we have in Israel with such a vast piece of land as the United States? And what kind of a defense contract would that generate?
Well, obviously, it would be a massive undertaking. You know, the U.S. already has a lot of defenses, built in to its the way that it's positioned and the way that it sort of monitors the airspace over the United States. I think that this would be going potentially a step beyond that, obviously, but may incorporate some of the elements that are already in place. So what he actually means by a Golden Dome, I think we'll have to see some more details on that. But certainly it will be akin to what Israel has. And the idea would be an early detection of any type of incursion into our airspace, which does happen from time to time, especially in up in the northern part of Alaska and places like that, where we do occasionally see Russian overflights and things like that. So I think the idea would be to, or at least I should say, where Russian flights are coming close to U.S. territory, right? So I think we would see some more vigilance on that front, but it'd be very expensive and take a long time to implement.
On the subject of Israel, just before we came to air, the president posted something fresh on Truth Social for Hamas directly, saying that you need to release all the hostages now, not later, immediately return all of the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it's over for you. He goes on to say, I'm sending Israel everything it needs to finish the job. Not a single Hamas member will be safe if you don't do as I say. It ends in all caps. Release the hostages now, or there will be hell to pay later. Dan, what does this signal about the progress or lack thereof we are seeing in trying to advance an extension of the ceasefire and exchange of hostages for Israel and Hamas?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think what we know at this point is that there have been some more discussions with Hamas or representatives of Hamas and the Trump administration. There's been some engagement, but it doesn't seem like that's been very fruitful at this point. So obviously you don't sort of put your people that you're negotiating with on blast if negotiations are going well, unless you're trying to gain some more leverage. So I think we can infer from Trump's post there that there are more negotiations to come, and the ones that have happened so far aren't going very well. Although his rhetoric there is not that dissimilar from what he said before, which is all hell will break loose in the Middle East if hostages aren't returned.
All right, Bloomberg's Dan Flatley, thank you so much. And of course, while we heard from President Trump about the Middle East last night, we also heard from him about the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, which he made clear he would like to see end. In fact, reading out part of a letter addressed to him from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy, who, of course, he got into some words with in the Oval Office just last week, suggesting that Zelenskiy is expressing a desire for peace and signaling there could be a way forward on the minerals deal the two countries were supposed to sign. And joining us now for more on that is Alexandra de Hoop Scheffer, acting president of the German Marshall Fund, who is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Welcome to Bloomberg TV and Radio, Alexandra. As you listen to the words of the president last night, the signals we are getting from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy, do you sense that this is a relationship that is on its way to repair, and that a minerals deal or an ultimate deal to end the war can, in fact, move forward as intended?
I think they just don't have the choice. They need to fix their relationship. And by the way, that's what European allies are expecting from Zelensky as well. And behind the scenes, it's interesting to see how Europeans, and notably France and the UK, are playing a mediating role in trying to help Zelensky and Trump fix their relationship.
If reports are true that the U.S. has stopped sharing intelligence that Kyiv has counted on to target Russians for some 3 years now, would a minerals deal help to resume the flow of that intel?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. What we are seeing live on screens is a deal making, right? It's a negotiation. And so the Trump administration is using all tools it has at its disposal to have Zelensky sign this deal. But once this minerals deals will be signed, and it will be signed in the days to come, this will have the U.S. involved in Ukraine. And, you know, Trump has been quite explicit about it. This minerals deal is more than just a minerals deal. It will involve the United States in Ukraine, and it's a form of U.S. security guarantee.
But Volodymyr Zelenskiy has suggested that alone is not enough of a security guarantee. The UK and France both have made clear as well that they want to make sure this peace is lasting, and that security guarantees from the U.S. could play a role in that. Is everyone really on the same page here, Alexandra?
No, there is a lot of divisions. There is a lot of divisions among European countries. But I must say what we've seen these past couple of days is, yes, a French-British tandem, a co-leadership, trying to put together a coalition of the willing and of the able. And by the way, next week, the chief of defense of these countries in Europe, and I say Europe, not the EU, because it includes the UK, and I think that's a very good thing, will come together and really get to action, right? What does the security guarantees mean? What could they look like? And what would be the degree and the level of involvement of European allies? And you're absolutely right. What we are seeing is a sort of division of labor. The U.S. wants to negotiate and wants to negotiate quick. But Europeans want to make sure that this deal is going to be a lasting, sustainable deal, and that they agree today that they will have to carry a lot of the burden of the post-deal. That's what you're seeing today.
So with that in mind, we heard, following the heated meeting that Kayleigh referenced on Friday in the Oval Office, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer delivered following this message, following his country's commitment for some years now in helping Ukraine. Listen.
With, if necessary, and together with others, boots on the ground and planes in the air. Mr. Speaker, it is right that Europe do the heavy lifting to support peace on our continent. But to succeed, this effort must also have strong US backing.
The narrative that we're hearing in many cases from the White House is you get the minerals deal first. We shouldn't even be talking about security guarantees. Will that, in fact, unlock a security guarantee from the U.S. that will allow the U.S., or the U.K. rather, and France to do exactly what you're describing?
Yes, I think we're arriving at a level of, if I can say, cooperation. Europeans need to step up, right? I think the message is clear. This is a moment of clarification and a moment of acceleration since Trump, has arrived in the Oval Office. And that's not such a bad thing, right? Europeans, what they're doing today, they should have done it decades ago. So Europeans need to accelerate. But what Keir Starmer said is absolutely essential, is that if you have Europeans stepping up and potentially deploying troops to preserve, protect, and keep this deal going in the long run, you absolutely need to have a U.S. form of security guarantee to be defined. And I think we will absolutely get to that.
Well, when we talk about Europe stepping up, it does mean financially as well, as they invest more in their own defense capability. Are you surprised at all by how quickly we have seen this shift from European governments? The man who will become the next German chancellor suggesting whatever it takes, hundreds of billions of dollars potentially in fiscal spending, a ramping up of defense spending, it looks like, across many countries within Europe. What happened to austerity? This is it feels like a huge attitude change.
It is. It is a big shift. And you've mentioned Germany. Germany is an example of a country that is today making a huge U-turn on its fiscal policy. The EU as well, because there is a collective, not unified, but a collective understanding that if Europe doesn't step up now, then Europe disappears, right? So this is a common understanding. And the two who are co-leading that conversation at that impulse is the French President Emmanuel Macron and the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And I think this tandem is exactly the right thing we should be seeing. These are the two nuclear powers on the European continent. They have the credibility, and they're going to succeed to put together a coalition of the willing. Will it be enough? Absolutely not, because to me there is a timing issue. There is the urgency of what to do now to make this deal on ending the war in Ukraine a sustainable deal, right, and have credible deterrence. And then for Europeans is what do we do in the months and years to come to build up a credible European defense capacity and industry. But now it's about now, and for the now, the U.S. is indispensable.
Thanks for sharing your views with
Thank
us
you.
today. Alexandra de Hoop Scheffer, acting president of the German Marshall Fund, in an important conversation today on Balance of Power. Coming up, Elon Musk set to visit House Republicans tonight. Having met with senators earlier, we'll discuss this impending meeting and what's next in the budget process with Republican Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
just had lunch and Elon Musk was there. And if you listen to him logically talk about some of the waste, fraud, and abuse that they found in systems such as Social Security, where 15 people are getting paid off the same number, or 15 checks are being sent off the same number, things that make total common sense, this is where I think DOGE has been extremely helpful and will continue to be, and even more so.
Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia on the early edition of Balance of Power today, talking about Elon Musk's appearance at a Republican congressional lunch tonight. Musk is expected to meet with House Republicans, including our next guest. Republican Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee is with us. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to see you. Before we even get to meeting with Elon Musk later, you were at an important meeting at the White House earlier with the president himself, coming off the big address last night. And obviously, just a couple of days, what are we, 9 days away from a funding deadline? What was your message for the president? And what was his priority? Keeping the government open or moving forward with this reconciliation plan?
Well, it was actually both. The president's about results. Everybody gets hung up on one bill or two bills or what have you. I mean, ultimately, he doesn't. He's like the rest of America. They just want it done. And my concerns are, as they have been, is that any savings we get from DOGE, are we going to turn around and give it to the, as I call them, the war pimps at the Pentagon, and let them spend us into oblivion once again? And, and how that's going to affect. And two, are we going to codify all this stuff we're finding out, the incredible fraud that's going on and with the DOGE is finding out in all these departments? They haven't even gotten to education or the Pentagon yet. So I suspect when they get there, these others will pale in comparison to the waste, fraud, and abuse there. And, it was just as it always is with President Trump, he was very gracious and he listened to my concerns at length. We talked about them, and some of his advisors in the room were going to get back to me on some of the more specific answers to fine-tune this thing. And I worry about the CR, a so-called clean CR, as I throw up the air quotes. What does that mean? The press keeps saying, well, if it's clean, are you going to vote for it? I say, well, what does that mean? Every time they say it's a clean CR, they say, well, wait a minute, there's something we need to tack on to this. There's something we need to tack on to that. And is there an end to the means? Are we going to use this CR as a catalyst, if you will, for future cuts that we know we've got to make? And that, to me, is what I'm concerned about. We hold our nose in both of these.
So as it stands right now, Congressman, did you tell the president you are not a reliable yes vote on either a continuing resolution or a budget reconciliation package, at least at this point?
I told him I'm going to vote my conscience, and he knows that. And we have a very good relationship. I've heard people say the president yells at you and says all this stuff. He's never done that with me, and I've not voted for any of the huge spending bills in the past, and even when in his prior administration. And I never did pick up the phone and he yelled at me about anything. He just talked to me about where I was on it and answered my questions. So, I'm still a no until they hear otherwise.
Well, of course, it's going to probably require some Democrats to pass a continuing resolution. And we heard a lot from some Democrats last night who were not very happy with the speech, Congressman, and more today. Catherine Clark of Massachusetts, of course, part of the Democratic leadership in the House, had this response to the address. Let's listen.
I am angry today. I am angry what I saw, that president of the United States who ran and had people vote for him because he said he was going to cut their costs, he was going to make sure they had a chance at the American dream, has come in with an unelected, richest man on earth and taken a chainsaw to everything we care about, everything the American people put their trust in him to do. It is a betrayal. So let's not talk about decorum when the plot is exposed and reiterated every single day.
You can respond to what she said if you want, Congressman. I guess I'm just curious. Does that sound like a party that you can work with?
No, their righteous indignation is ringing very false with America. Even CNN released a poll that didn't show, when you can't stand for a child who's who has brain cancer, when you can't stand for a widow whose husband fell over them to keep them from getting shot, when you can't stand for hostages being released in Gaza. Those are the things the Democrat Party couldn't stand for. And the only thing they cheered for was more war in Ukraine. You can't stand for when you find out that you're paying for circumcisions in other countries, for transgender conversion of mice, millions and millions of dollars for these kind of programs, and you can't stand for that. American public's laughing at those people. They are just trying to appeal to their very, very small and decreasing base of radicals. They do not represent America. I would dare say most of them don't represent the majority of their constituents. America is tired of this nonsense. They're tired of going to the store and having to pay $600 more a month just to survive. And they're seeing their money just flush down the toilet. They're tired of seeing when we vote for $100 million for FEMA to give funds to the people in upper in western North Carolina and upper East Tennessee that got hit hard by Helene, and 54 million of it goes to New York to house in luxury settings, house illegals. They're just running from it. And I'll tell you why. Just follow the money, because that money is being siphoned off, and it's doing a circuitous route back to Washington, right out of American taxpayers' back pockets into the back pockets of politicians. Their wives and or girlfriends work at these agencies, and they're getting cut. That's why they're screaming. That's the problem. They are so out of touch. They are without a rudder, without a moral compass, if you will, and America's sick of it.
Okay.
Well, Congressman, we are running out of time, and I know you have a meeting to get to in about an hour. As Joe mentioned, Elon Musk will be meeting with Republican members of the House on DOGE today. He also joined the Senate luncheon today, in which we understand Republican senators expressed to him that for the cuts he's pursuing at DOGE, they need congressional approval or they risk being overturned in court. Would you also share that message with him in this meeting?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Well, that's not his job, though. That's our job. We got it. Senate and Congress need to get some guts and back up some of this stuff, this outrageous spending. And again, it goes in both parties, ma'am. It's just like when we gave our missile defense system to Ukraine and had to rebuild ours with a multi-billion-dollar no-bid contract. Members of both parties had stock in that defense system, and they made a lot of money off of that. The same with this stuff. It's cutting into their fat cat pockets. Both parties are greedy, and they need to cut it out, and America needs to send them to another job if they can't get out of this corruption.
All right. We will leave it on that note. Republican Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee, thanks for coming back to join us on Balance of Power. And we'll have more on that meeting between Elon Musk and House Republicans that is set to take place just over an hour from now when we return here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Created the brand new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. Perhaps you've heard of it. Perhaps. Which is headed by Elon Musk, who is in the gallery tonight.
President Trump, during his address to Congress last night, praising the work of Elon Musk and DOGE. And Musk is back on Capitol Hill today, attending a Senate Republican lunch earlier and expected to meet with House Republicans later this evening. Doing so, of course, is being affiliated with DOGE. We did just hear President Trump last night on multiple occasions referring to him as the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, though the White House had previously said he is not, in fact, the DOGE administrator. And I would imagine this is going to end up in some court cases that are ongoing.
So he runs the DOGE. He's got an office right across the driveway there to run the DOGE. Presumably there he is in the cabinet meeting a couple of days back there. But he was not at the table in that cabinet meeting. No. And, Kayleigh, he was not on the floor last night. He was sitting up in the gallery as a guest.
Very true, though he did, of course, get the shout out, as we just heard. And as we talk about his running of the DOGE, I do wonder what he'll hear from House Republicans on the manner with which he is running it, knowing that they have faced some upset from constituents at town halls about what's happening with the cuts to the federal government in recent weeks, to the extent that Republicans are now being encouraged not to hold them at all.
No more town halls, at least for now. 9 days to a potential government shutdown, so keep that in your pocket for now. Glad you're with us this evening. Make sure to stay right here on Bloomberg TV and radio for the Asia Trade, their exclusive interview with the CEO of ARM, Renee Haas, on the company's new 10-year deal with Malaysia. That starts 6 p.m. Eastern, following Balance of Power. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.